A weathered wrought iron bench creaks softly under the weight of Hope, a 68-year-old woman whose trembling hands clutch a worn cloth bag. The fabric, once navy blue, has faded to a melancholic gray mirroring the overcast Tuesday sky. Her brown eyes, framed by wrinkles that tell tales of decades of smiles and tears, observe the bustling central square with a serenity only those who have truly lived possess. There's something about her posture, upright despite her age, dignified despite her circumstances, that clashes with the image many hurried passers-by create as they rush past. The square teems with the morning routine. Executives stride briskly, phones glued to their ears. Mothers push strollers, chattering about the day's tasks. Teenagers in uniforms head towards school, backpacks slung over their shoulders, earbuds isolating them from the outside world. In the center of this whirlwind of intertwined lives, Hope seems like an island of quietude, a fixed point amidst the urban chaos. Her simple clothes, a beige cotton blouse and a dark skirt that reaches her ankles, are impeccably clean, revealing the care she takes with her few possessions. The first sign of discomfort comes from a group of young people passing near the bench. One of them, a 20-something guy in a designer t-shirt, subtly points at Hope and whispers something to his friends, causing them to chuckle quietly. She notices the gesture, how could she not, but keeps her gaze fixed on the bubbling ornamental fountain in the center of the square, her hands tightening almost imperceptibly on the bag's strap. There is no anger in her expression, only a deep, familiar sadness, like someone who has experienced this kind of silent judgment countless times. Minutes later, a middle-aged woman, elegantly dressed in a gray pantsuit and carrying a genuine leather handbag, approaches the bench where Hope sits. It's one of the few benches in the square that sits under the generous shade of a centuries-old tree, offering respite from the warming sun. The woman stops, looks at Hope with an expression that mixes discomfort and impatience, and gestures with her hand, indicating she wants her to move. "Excuse me," she says sharply, "I need to sit here. I'm waiting for my husband." Hope slowly raises her eyes, meeting the woman's gaze. For a moment, time seems to stand still. There's so much in that look, not pleading, not resentment, but an unwavering dignity that makes the woman hesitate. "Of course, ma'am," Hope replies softly, rising with the elegance of someone who still maintains the manners learned in better times. The bench is for everyone. She walks a few feet and sits on the ground, leaning against the tree trunk, her bag carefully placed beside her. The scene doesn't go unnoticed by some people passing through the square. A man in a suit stops reading his newspaper and observes the situation with a furrowed brow. A nurse coming from the nearby hospital slows her pace, clearly disturbed by what she has witnessed. Two college students exchange uncomfortable glances. But nobody says anything. Nobody interferes. It's as if an invisible veil of indifference covers the scene, turning it into just another commonplace episode of urban life. The woman in the pantsuit settles onto the bench, pulling a smartphone from her bag and starting to type furiously. Her movements are jerky, almost aggressive, as if she's channeling some inner discomfort through her fingers tapping the screen. Occasionally, she casts furtive glances at Hope, who remains seated under the tree with disconcerting tranquility. The elderly woman has taken a small prayer book from her bag, its pages yellowed with age, and reads silently, moving her lips almost imperceptibly. Then Mr. Benedict appears. At 75, he's a familiar figure in the square, a retired widower of 3 years. He spends his mornings walking and feeding the pigeons that gather near the fountain. His simple but well-cared-for clothes, his worn but polished shoes, and especially his hand-carved wooden cane, tell the story of a man who has lived with purpose and maintained his dignity intact. His blue eyes, still bright despite his age, immediately capture the scene. Hope on the ground, the woman occupying the bench with an air of ownership. Benedict approaches slowly, each step calculated, each movement deliberate. There is no hurry in his walk, but there is determination. He stops in front of the woman in the pantsuit and with a courteous gesture touches the brim of his felt hat. "Good morning, ma'am," he says with a firm but polite voice. "May I ask you a question?" The woman looks up from her phone, clearly irritated by the interruption. "What is it?" She replies curtly. "Do you know that lady under the tree over there?" Benedict asks, pointing his cane towards Hope. "No, and I don't want to," is the sharp reply. Benedict nods slowly, as if digesting the information. "I understand, then allow me to introduce her. That is Hope Miller, a widow for 15 years. She was a teacher for 40 years at the local elementary school. She taught hundreds of children to read and write, many of whom are now doctors, engineers, lawyers." His voice maintains its respectful tone, but there's a growing strength in it. "She lost the house where she lived for 5 decades when her son-in-law disappeared with her savings. She now lives in a boarding house, 2 blocks from here, in a room of 9 square feet." The woman in the pantsuit shifted uncomfortably on the bench, but Benedict continued, his voice now echoing slightly across the square, drawing the attention of more people. "Every day, Hope comes to this square. Not to bother anyone, not to ask anyone for anything. She comes because this is the only place where she can still sit in peace and remember when she used to bring her students here for outdoor classes. She comes because when you're alone in the world, sometimes you just need a place to exist without being judged." Benedict's words began to attract a small circle of onlookers. The nurse who had slowed her pace was now standing still, listening intently. The 2 college students had drawn closer. The man with the newspaper folded it and paid attention. Even some of the young people who had laughed earlier returned, drawn in by the voice which, while not loud, carried an undeniable moral authority. "But what strikes me most about her," Benedict continued, "is that in all these years I've known her, I've never seen her complain, never seen her show bitterness. When a young person treats her badly, she smiles. When someone ignores her, she blesses them. When someone judges her by her appearance, she responds with kindness." He paused, his eyes now fixed on the woman in the pantsuit. "Hope has taught me that dignity isn't in the clothes we wear or the bench we occupy. It's in how we treat each other, especially when no one is looking." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with a tension that made the air seem heavier. The woman in the pantsuit stared at the ground, her face red with embarrassment. Hope, who had stopped reading and was watching the scene with a serene expression, slowly stood up and walked toward the group. "Mr. Benedict," she said softly, "there's no need for all this. The square is for everyone, and we all have our place in it." But Benedict shook his head. "Ah, my dear friend, but there is a need, because when we allow indifference to become normal, when we let a lack of compassion become routine, we lose a piece of our humanity." He turned to the people who had gathered. "How many times have we passed by situations like this and pretended not to see? How many times have we chosen the comfort of silence over the courage of action?" The nurse stepped forward. "You're right," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I've worked at the hospital around the corner for 15 years, and I see Hope pass by every day. She always greets the staff, always has a kind word for the patients she meets on the sidewalk, and I never stop to talk to her. Always too busy, always in too much of a hurry." One of the college students, a shy-looking young man, cleared his throat. I've seen her mistreated other times, and I never did anything. I always thought it wasn't my problem." He looked directly at Hope. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Starting today, that's going to change." It was as if an emotional dam had broken. One by one, people began to speak, to share their observations, their regrets, their promises of change. The man with the newspaper admitted he had seen the scene repeat itself many times. An elderly woman walking through the square said she had always wanted to talk to Hope, but never found the courage. Even some of the young people who had laughed approached, clearly embarrassed, and apologized. And at this moment, I need to pause this story that touches our hearts so deeply. You who are reading probably feel the same thing I feel telling this narrative, the urgent need to reflect on our own actions, on the times we turned our faces to situations of silent injustice. This story reminds me why I started this channel, to share narratives that transform us, that make us better people. If you are feeling the same as me, if this story is touching your heart and making you rethink your attitudes, then you need to subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell, because stories like this, that teach us about empathy, dignity, and courage, come to you every week. Don't let other transformative narratives go unnoticed in your life. Subscribe now, because together we can create a current of compassion that begins here and spreads throughout the world. And now, let's continue our story, because what happens next will mark your soul forever. The woman in the pantsuit remained silent, but tears began to stream down her face. Finally, she got up from the bench and walked slowly to Hope. "Ma'am," she said in a choked voice, I apologize. My behavior was inexcusable. Please, sit on the bench. It's your place, it always has been." Hope looked at her with tenderness and shook her head. "My dear, you don't need to apologize. We all have our difficult days, our moments of impatience. The bench is big enough for both of us." "No," insisted the woman, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "It's not about the bench, it's about who I've become, about how I stopped seeing people." She took a deep breath. "My name is Helen. I'm a lawyer, a mother of two. And today, a 68-year-old woman taught me more about dignity than I've learned in 40 years of life." Helena stepped back a few paces, and to everyone's surprise, began to address the gathering group. "You want to know why I reacted that way? Because I'm in the middle of a messy divorce, because I just found out my ex-husband hid assets, because I'm afraid of ending up." She looked at Hope, ending up like her. "And instead of having compassion for someone facing what I fear with such dignity, I treated her as if she were a threat to my emotional security." Silence once again fell over the square, but it was a different silence now. No longer one of indifference, but of deep reflection. Mr. Benedict approached Helena and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "My dear, acknowledging our mistakes is the first step to becoming better people, and the courage to admit them publicly, that's rare these days." Hope approached Helena, and to everyone's astonishment, hugged her. It was a motherly embrace, comforting, full of forgiveness and understanding. "My dear," she whispered in the younger woman's ear, "life tests us in ways we don't expect, but it also gives us opportunities to start over each day. Today is a new day for both of us." What happened next was something no one present would ever forget. Helena, still embraced by Hope, began to sob, not from sadness, but from relief. It was as if years of tension, emotional hardness, a shielding against vulnerability were being released in that hug. And then, one by one, other people began to approach. The nurse came first, then the students, then the man from the newspaper. In a matter of minutes, Hope was at the center of a human circle, each person wanting to touch her hand, say a word, ask for a blessing, or simply be near that source of serenity and wisdom. Mr. Benedict watched the scene with teary eyes. At 75, he had seen many things, but few had touched him as deeply as this moment. It wasn't just about giving up the bench to an elderly woman, it was about recognizing the humanity in every person, about seeing beyond appearances, about understanding that we all carry invisible pain, and that an act of kindness can transform not just a day, but an entire life. Helena pulled away from the hug and looked around at the gathered people. "I want to do something. I can't just go back to my life pretending this didn't happen." She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to Hope. "Ma'am, if you need anything, legal assistance, a place to stay, anything, please call me. It's the least I can do." But Hope shook her head gently. "My dear, I don't need charity. I need what you just gave me, recognition of my humanity. That's worth more than any material help." She smiled, her wrinkles deepening beautifully. "But if you really want to do something, do this. The next time you see someone being ignored, disrespected, or treated as invisible, remember this moment. Don't let it pass. A kind word, a smile, a simple acknowledgement that that person exists, that can change an entire day." The nurse stepped forward. "Hope, every day when I leave the hospital, I'll pass by here. If you're in the square, I want to stop and chat. I want to hear your stories. I want to learn from you." "Me too," said one of the students. "Actually, I'm studying education. I'd love to hear about your years as a teacher." One by one, those present made similar commitments, not grandiose promises of changing the world, but small personal commitments to see, to stop, to connect. The man from the newspaper said he would make a point of greeting Hope every morning. A woman who had approached during the conversation offered to bring a thermos of hot coffee on cold mornings. The young people who had laughed promised they would never again judge anyone by appearances. Mr. Benedict watched everything with a serene smile. He knew he had only been a catalyst, that the true transformation came from the heart of each person present. "Hope," he finally said, "you've just done something extraordinary. You've transformed an ordinary morning into a life lesson that we will all carry forever." "It wasn't me," she replied simply. "It was life. It always gives us opportunities to be better, to connect with each other. We just need to be open to seeing them." When the small group finally began to disperse, each person carried something different than what they had brought. Helena put the card back in her purse, but not before writing Hope's phone number on the back. Not to offer help, but to stay in touch, to learn, to grow. The nurse was already planning how she could introduce Hope to some of her hospital colleagues. The students chatted excitedly about how they could document the retired teacher's stories. Mr. Benedict was the last to say goodbye. He approached Hope, who had finally sat down on the bench, not because someone had insisted, but because it now represented something different. It was no longer a simple seat in the square, but a symbol of recognized dignity, of celebrated humanity. "My dear friend," he said, tipping his hat in respect, "thank you for letting me be a part of this today. Sometimes an old man like me wonders if he can still make a difference in the world. Today you showed me that I can." Hope smiled and gently touched Mr. Benedict's wrinkled hand. "Mr. Benedict, you did more than you realize, not just for me, but for everyone who was here. You gave them permission to be human, to connect, to care. That's a rare gift these days." As Hope walked away, Hope opened her small prayer book again, but this time, she wasn't seeking solace in solitude. She was giving thanks for the abundance of human connection she had experienced that extraordinary morning. The sun, which had been hidden behind clouds throughout the ordeal, finally broke through the gray curtain and bathed the square in warm golden light. The following hours were different. People continued to pass through the square, but many now greeted Hope. The nurse stopped by during her lunch break for a quick chat. One of the students brought an extra sandwich and shared it with her. Helen returned late in the afternoon, not to apologize again, but simply to sit beside her and talk about life, about sorrows, about hopes. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Hope prepared to return to her small boarding house. She carefully tucked her prayer book into her faded bag and rose from the bench with her usual elegance. But there was something different about her movements, a lightness that wasn't there in the morning, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulder. She walked slowly through the square, observing the day's final movements. Children played on the swings under the watchful eyes of their parents. Couples shared benches whispering secrets. Elderly people played chess under the yellowish light of the street lamps that were beginning to turn on. It was the same old square, but to Hope, it was as if she were seeing it for the very first time. That night, in her small room at the boarding house, Hope wrote in an old notebook she kept under her pillow. Her words, written in careful script despite her age, read, "Today I learned that miracles don't have to be big to be powerful. Sometimes, a miracle is simply someone who cares enough to stop, see and act. Today I learned that we are never too old to inspire or too young to have wisdom. But mostly, I learned that dignity isn't something we lose when we lose our possessions. It's something we carry with us, regardless of circumstances, and it multiplies when it's recognized and respected by others." The next day, when Hope arrived at the square, she found something that made her smile, a small makeshift sign made of cardboard, attached to the bench where she had spent the previous morning. With carefully drawn letters, probably by one of the children who played there, it read, "Hope's Bench, teacher, friend, and example of dignity." She sat delicately on the bench, observing the morning activity of the square. And this time, she wasn't alone. Mr. Benedict approached with his steady gait, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The nurse waved from the hospital entrance. The students greeted her as they passed on their way to the university. Helen honked discreetly from her car and waved from the window. The transformation had been subtle but profound. There were no grand changes, no revolutions, but there was something in the air of that square that wasn't there before. An awareness, a connection, a mutual recognition of shared humanity. People still hurried by, still had their worries and urgencies, but now there were also moments of pause, of recognition, of casual kindness, that made the atmosphere more welcoming for everyone. Months later, Hope continued to frequent the square every morning, but now she didn't just go to exist in peace, she went to be part of a community. Helen had become a close friend, visiting her regularly, and discovering that the retired teacher's life wisdom was more valuable than any legal advice. The nurse organized an informal group of people who gathered in the square on Saturdays to chat and share stories. The students were documenting Hope's memories of her teaching years, creating a project that would be presented at the university. Mr. Benedict, who had been the catalyst for this entire transformation, observed the changes with quiet satisfaction. He knew he had planted a seed that morning, but he recognized that the growth came from the kindness that already existed in people's hearts, kindness that just needed permission to manifest itself. The square became known in the region not for its architectural beauty or special events, but for something more subtle and powerful, for being a place where people cared for one another, where human dignity was recognized and celebrated, where small acts of kindness happened naturally every day. And Hope? She remained the same person as always, serene, dignified, kind. But now she knew something she didn't know before, that her life had touched other lives profoundly, that her existence mattered, that her story was worth telling, not because someone told her so directly, but because she could see it in the smile of every person who greeted her, in the care with which they treated her, in the respect they showed. Hope's story and the story of the bench in the square spread organically through the community, not through newspapers or social media, but through the oldest and most powerful form of communication, from heart to heart, from person to person. Parents told their children, teachers shared with students, friends recounted the experience to one another. And each time the story was told, it carried with it the central message that we all have the power to restore someone's dignity, to transform an ordinary moment into something extraordinary, to make a difference through simple but profoundly human actions. The true beauty of that story wasn't in its happy ending, but in its replicable simplicity. Anyone, anywhere could have the courage of Mr. Benedict, the transformation of Helen, the kindness of the nurse, the enthusiasm of the students. Anyone could choose to see beyond appearances, recognize the humanity in the other, offer respect where there had been indifference before. And so, the city square remained a common place, with its wrought iron bench, its bubbling fountain, its ancient trees. But it now carried an invisible yet palpable lesson, that true social transformation doesn't happen through grand gestures or pompous pronouncements, but through thousands of small acts of acknowledgement, respect, and compassion that spread silently, touching lives, healing wounds, and reminding us all that ultimately, we are all simply human beings trying to find our place in the world, deserving dignity, respect, and, above all, the recognition that our existence matters.